This question is about an algorithm and reading pseudocode again. So they do like you to be able to read pseudocode. There's not a great deal these days of writing it, although you could still be asked to write it in the exam. But they do like you to be able to read it and interpret it. So it's a subroutine. So that's, in Python, that would be the same as a definition, called diff currencies. And in this case, they're sending a parameter called currencies to it. So that would be the same kind of idea in Python. So a subroutine is just a function or a procedure, like a definition in Python. That's the first thing to say. So what I want us to do is to identify some errors in the logic of the algorithm. So logic errors mean that it might well still work, or it might work after a fashion, but it doesn't give us a result necessarily that we want. So they do give us some ideas here. They tell us that line 1 and line 6 are a problem, or at least we need to rewrite those to make the algorithm work. So the first one, we might as well start with line 1. So it's called subroutine diff currencies, and they're sending currencies to it. Now, the first thing to notice is that inside the subroutine, they're defining currencies as a list anyway. So currencies is a list with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 things in it. So we don't need to send currencies to it if we're then going to redefine it. So the thing that we don't have here is X. So X is nowhere to be seen here. We're not sending X. We've just made it up here. So return currencies X. Well, there isn't an X. So obviously that's the error. So we'd write the correction to that as they've done capitals. So we'll try and do the same. Subroutine diff currencies and in the brackets we want X. So X is what we've changed just there. Instead of currencies we're getting X, so that's our first thing that doesn't work. So then outside of the routine here we've got a for loop. For I gets 8 to 0 step 1. So we can run for loops backwards, and this is running backwards because what it wants to do is output in reverse alphabetical order. So starting with yen and ending with baht. So we can do it this way, but this is not quite right in the syntax here. So if it's step 1, that would be adding 1, whereas we want to go from 8 to 0 according to this. So it needs to be -1. So that's obviously the first idea to think about. So I'm going to write this line in anyway because it's line 6 that we're writing in. So for I, and we're writing pseudocode. So for I gets, well, we're not going to write that there. We'll say something to 0 step -1. So it's the -1 thing that we've changed because that's going to step down from, in that case, 8 to 0. So now let's go and have a look at our actual list. We do have 8 things in the list, but as we know with a list, if we've got the first thing in there is baht and dollar, etc. So we know that the way lists work, they start with 0 and then 1. So that means when we get to yen, yen will be 7. So we don't want to start at 8, we want to start at 7 because that's the top of that list. So for I gets 7 to 0 step -1 is the correction that we need to make. So this one, when it was in the exam, this caught a lot of people out in thinking about how this worked, probably because they hadn't done a lot of for loops that stepped backwards. Most of our for loops we use tend to step forwards, so most people haven't used a lot of this -1 idea. And the other thing that they struggled with as well was this idea of the fact that 8 was not right, because there are 8 things uh, in the list, but we need to think about how the indexing works in our lists, and lists start at 0. So it was actually a relatively straightforward idea to get the marks. We're going to get a mark for X, we're going to get a mark for 7, and a mark for -1.